They shot the monkey! I'm at my wit's end!
Here at Methodist Hospital, newsmen were aware of published reports that the body of someone called Howard Hughes was inside the pathology department.
He was pulling up and I was going down, and then the next thing I knew, my elbow was in my ear, the world was sideways, and there was gravel in my teeth, and everyone was really quiet.
20 disturbing movie accidents, 7 levels. From a horse accident that almost killed a comedian to a Hollywood actor who nearly drowned on camera. These are some of the most horrific and shocking accidents ever to occur on a movie set. The deeper into the iceberg we get, the more extreme and irreversible they become. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Disclaimer. Level 1. The Avengers, 2012. In June 2011, Jeremy Fitzgerald turned up for work on a major production. His job for the day was easy. Get hit with an arrow, fall 30 feet off a building, land safely, walk away. He was doubling for Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye in what would become one of the biggest superhero films ever made, The Avengers. So everything was in motion. Cameras rolling, crew positioned, everything calculated for maximum safety and minimum risk, as with all big-budget Hollywood movies. The director called action and Jeremy began the scene. But his foot caught on something during the descent. Mid-fall, his body twisted, the momentum carrying him sideways instead of straight down. His head connected with a brick on the way past the building's exterior, tearing away what witnesses described as a freshly peeled slab of scalp. By the time the scene was cut, blood was streaming down his face. It was a bad situation, but as the crew members tried to help him, they realized how lucky he had been. Just inches away from where he impacted was a razor-sharp rain gutter. That piece of metal could have done considerably more damage than removing a chunk of hair and skin. He was lucky. When the news broke, Marvel and Paramount jumped in to respond and control the narrative. Marvel spokesperson downplayed the severity of the incident, claiming Fitzgerald simply slid briefly along the side of the building and got right back up and did several more takes. No mention of the blood, no acknowledgement of the scalp hanging loose from his skull, just he was fine, no story here. They weren't totally wrong. Jeremy himself refused medical treatment, making no hospital visit and having no stitches to close the wound. Instead, someone handed him a bandage and he returned to work with exposed flesh still visible beneath it. The cameras kept rolling, the production schedule maintained its momentum, and everything was normal. Now that's a superhero. The Tournament, 2009.
Here I am after 5 months from the accident. I'm walking on my feet. And it's looked like a penguin walk, but it's just the beginning, as the doctor said it will be fine after a while.
When The Tournament hit theaters in 2009, audiences saw this incredible stunt. But during production, it was not so epic. It was the 4th take, and the semi-trailer truck was still not flipping no matter what the Bulgarian special effects crew did. But Cheryl Roth, the assistant director, watched from the production area as the stuntman and effects specialist tried again and again to execute what should have been a straightforward vehicle rollover for the chase scene. Each failure meant more pressure, more desperation to get the shot before daylight ran out. Because, as anybody who's worked in film knows, time is money. When all of the conventional methods failed, the crew decided to improvise. They brought out an iron pump, a makeshift solution that would hit the ground and push the left side of the vehicle up, forcing it to turn aside. The air cannon that was set up was already risky enough. These devices fire steel pistons at tremendous pressure to create spectacular car flips for Hollywood productions. Under controlled conditions, they're effective but highly dangerous. But using an iron implement as a ground strike tool pushed the stunt into uncharted territory. This was not common, so it shouldn't have been a massive surprise when the iron broke. It wasn't even a clean break. The metal fully shattered, sending debris flying toward the production crew like shrapnel from an explosion. Cheryl Roth, standing in what should have been a safe zone, took the full impact, the metal snapping both of his legs. Another crew member was also hit. The camera kept rolling, capturing every frame of the accident as it unfolded. Cheryl's body had completely crumpled, the iron debris having done its damage in an instant. The pain would define the next 2 years of his life. For 6 months, he had endless surgeries and had to be trained to stand on his feet again and walk. He couldn't work, but he was confident that everything would be fine. After all, the insurance policy promised 10,000 leva. Unfortunately, they delivered only 800. That's roughly 400 euros for each shattered leg and a destroyed career trajectory. The Bulgarian Alliance Insurance Company's payment barely covered a week's medical expenses. After the movie was released, this footage surfaced online showing the exact moment of the incident. Shiro eventually walked again, but it took nearly 2 years to achieve what most people take for granted. Level 2. Deadpool 2.
Tonight, the tragic death of stuntwoman Joy S.J. Harris is raising questions about safety on movie sets. In audio obtained by TMZ, 911 dispatchers described the chaos in the aftermath of the crash on the set of Deadpool 2.
Joy Harris had been riding motorcycles professionally since 2014, carving her name into racing history as the first African-American woman licensed to compete in AMA-sanctioned events. But August 14, 2017 marked her debut in a completely different arena. For the first time in her life, she would be performing Hollywood stunts for the blockbuster sequel Deadpool 2. Harris was doubling for actress Zazie Beetz' character Domino, riding a Ducati 939 Hyperstrada through the open doors of Vancouver's Convention Center, down 2 wooden ramps built over stairs, then coming to a controlled stop at a designated landing. The speed would never exceed 15 kilometers per hour, barely 10 miles per hour. It was complex, but easy for a rider of her caliber. Of course, it's not quite that simple. She'd only joined the production days earlier, hastily brought in to replace another stunt performer. There hadn't been time to fit her with a custom helmet that could work under Domino's wig, so she rode without one, matching the character's look in the film. Harris spent the entire morning of August 14th rehearsing the sequence, running through it approximately 7 times, gradually building from quarter speed to half speed to full speed. Everything went perfectly. Take after take, Harris navigated the course flawlessly. By 8:14 a.m., the crew was ready to roll cameras for the actual shoot. The motorcycle emerged from the convention center doors exactly as rehearsed. Harris turned left toward the first ramp, just as she had done successfully multiple times before, but something changed as she transitioned onto the wooden platform. Instead of slowing on her planned stop, the bike accelerated. Harris shot past the stopping point, continued over the second ramp, and became airborne as the motorcycle crossed the roadway. The Ducati struck the concrete sidewalk curb with tremendous force. Harris was thrown from the bike and propelled through the plate glass window of Shaw Tower, the blunt force traumatic head injuries instantly ending her life. An investigation later revealed that no kill switch lanyard had been attached, no risk assessment had been conducted, and no safety barriers prevented her from leaving the set perimeter. 5 successful rehearsals had created a false sense of security, but the production was a disaster waiting to happen. Jackass Number 2, 2006. The cameras were rolling for the final scene of Jackass Number 2. Ryan Dunn and Bam Margera stood ready for a pretty straightforward gag, getting yanked out of frame by a horse during the movie's climactic musical number. A rope was tied around their feet, attached to a galloping horse that would drag them away in classic Wild West fashion. With a jackass twist, I guess. By this point, the crew had filmed so many dangerous stunts throughout production that this one looked almost tame by comparison. It was just 2 friends getting pulled along for a few seconds of footage.
The very ending of the movie, Dunn and I were attached with ropes around our feet, and a horse was going to come by full speed and just rip us out.
But when the horse bolted, both men were yanked violently off their feet. Bam managed to take the fall relatively well, but Ryan crashed down with his full body weight concentrated on his shoulder. The impact tore through his muscle tissue in ways that nobody, even him, knew at the time. He got back up, probably made some jokes, and the scene wrapped. The footage even made it into the final cut of the film. But weeks later, the truth revealed itself. The shoulder injury had damaged Ryan's muscles so severely that a blood clot formed. That clot had positioned itself dangerously close to both his heart and brain. According to the doctors, the situation was so critical that it could kill him at any moment.
Dunn landed really wrong and messed his shoulder up and wound up getting a blood clot.
Blood clot is really dangerous because if a chunk of that went into his heart or into his brain, he would die.
This was by far one of the worst jackass injuries yet, and for one of the simplest stunts. Ryan had to undergo serious treatment involving intensive medical intervention that left him battling severe depression. He was also dealing with Lyme disease at the same time, making the experience even more difficult. The combination of the blood clot treatment and the disease sent him spiraling into isolation, pushing him to cut off personal contact with his friends and refuse to participate in any Jackass-related events. For years, he stayed away from the crew that had been his chosen family. He eventually returned for Jackass 3D in 2010, but the damage from that horse stunt in 2006 had fundamentally changed him and his approach to things. The Mummy, 1999. It was 1998, and Brendan Fraser was in Morocco filming a complex hanging stunt for The Mummy. The sequence called for his character, Rick O'Connell, to dangle from a noose, saved at the last moment by Rachel Weisz's character. Fraser had done the wide shot with a stuntman in harness, but now they needed the close-up. Director Stephen Sommers positioned Fraser under the gallows with a hemp rope tied into a noose around his neck. Fraser stood on his toes, the rope providing just enough tension to look convincing without actually harming him in any way. The first take went smoothly. Fraser performed his best choking acting, the camera captured what it needed, and everyone should have moved on. But Sommers, like all directors, wasn't satisfied. He approached Fraser between takes with a request. "Hey, it doesn't really look like you're choking. Can you sell it?" Fraser agreed to one more take, standing on his toes again as the crew member above him held the rope taut.
I was standing on my toes like this with the rope. Steven ran over and he said, "Hey, it doesn't really look like you're choking. Can you sell it?" And I'm like, "All right, fine."
But this time, the rope handler pulled the tension higher. Suddenly, Fraser found himself stuck on his toes with nowhere to go but down. The rope was pulling up while gravity was pulling him down, creating pressure on his carotid arteries that cut off blood flow to his brain. Fraser remembered seeing the camera start to pan around, then everything went black.
And so the camera spun around and it landed on my face, and all I remember is this sort of volume kind of like sound going, "Ew."
Fraser collapsed completely unconscious while the crew watched. For the next 10 seconds, Brendan Fraser, one of the biggest stars in the world at this point that this channel totally stands, was out cold on the ground with gravel pressed into his face. The stunt coordinator rushed over, calling his name repeatedly until Fraser finally regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes, his elbow was somehow in his ear and there was gravel in his teeth.
So he was pulling up and I was going down, and then the next thing I knew, my elbow was in my ear, the world was sideways, and there was gravel in my teeth, and everyone was really quiet.
The coordinator's first words to the dazed actor were oddly cheerful. "Congratulations, you're in the club. Same thing happened to Mel Gibson on Braveheart." Fraser could only respond with confusion, wanting nothing more than to go home. Maybe because people who are at home get to watch more of our videos, so don't forget to hit subscribe if you want us to make more of these. Level 3. The Abyss, 1989. Ed Harris thought he was just doing his job when James Cameron told him to swim without a suit at the bottom of the submerged set for The Abyss. It's what any actor would do, right? The scene required Harris to hold his breath while being towed along the underwater stage 30 feet below the surface. But as often happens when James Cameron and water get together, an actor almost died. The safety protocols had been thorough and clear. Each actor had designated safety divers watching them, ready to provide oxygen when needed. But now they were shooting, and Harris could feel his lungs starting to burn for air. He gave the signal, the safety diver should have been there in seconds, but he wasn't. The diver was tangled up in cables. Harris waited underwater, his chest screaming for oxygen, watching his safety line struggle to reach him as his vision started to blur.
I did this sign, out of air, unhook myself, get over to the wall. I got no air. I'm waiting for air, and this guy's hung up somewhere. I got nobody to give me air.
Finally, another crew member swam over with a breathing regulator, moving quickly to save him. Harris grabbed it desperately and tried to breathe, but water flooded his mouth instead of air. The regulator was upside down. He was drowning while holding the device that should have saved his life. Harris started to panic as he sucked in more water with each attempt to breathe. His body was literally fighting against him, demanding air he couldn't get from the malfunctioning equipment. But the crew member who brought the regulator didn't understand what was wrong. That's when the underwater cinematographer, Al Giddings, noticed the chaos unfolding. He ripped the upside-down regulator from Harris's mouth and shoved his own working one between Harris's lips. Air finally filled Harris's lungs.
Put his regulator in the right way, took a big breath, and I went, oh man, okay, let's go up for a second.
Throughout this near-death experience, James Cameron kept the cameras rolling. Even as his lead actor fought for his life, Cameron continued filming the scene. When Harris finally surfaced and caught his breath, he achieved something every actor dreams of. He punched James Cameron right in the face. The adrenaline carried Harris through the rest of the day's shoot, but that evening, driving home from the set of The Abyss, the reality hit him. He had to pull over because he couldn't stop crying, a breakdown he said lasted through the night. Almost 10 years later, Cameron would go on to make Titanic, another water-based movie where he put his actors through the ringer, leading Kate Winslet to say she would only work with him again for a lot of money. As for Harris, it took him almost 35 years to stop hating Cameron, or so they claim. The Hangover Part 2, 2011. In December 2010, during the filming of The Hangover Part 2 in Bangkok, Thailand, Australian stuntman Scott McLean was serving as Ed Helms' double. They were shooting a high-speed car chase sequence involving a taxi.
Please stop the monkey! I'm at my wit's end!
McLean was the passenger in the vehicle, racing at high speeds when it collided with a truck being driven by another stuntman. According to court documents filed later, the stunt coordinator Russell Solberg allegedly changed the timing mid-stunt, commanding the driver to increase speed significantly to a speed unsafe for the stunt. This split-second decision resulted in a devastating collision. Emergency workers rushed McLean to a nearby medical facility before transferring him to a hospital in Bangkok. The situation had grown so severe that doctors placed him in a medically induced coma to minimize the brain damage and combat swelling. As his partner of 13 years, Raylene Chapman, later revealed, not many people expected him to make it through the first night. It was life or death those first nights. After being stabilized, McLean was airlifted to Australia, where he continued treatment in a rehab facility. But his recovery proved painstakingly slow. He had to relearn everything like a child would. 2 months after the accident, Chapman celebrated a milestone. McLean smiled for the first time. But despite making progress, McLean was left with permanent brain and physical injuries. He experienced ongoing seizures, speech impediments, physical limitations, and brain trauma.
Scott had suffered critical brain damage. Doctors couldn't say what the future held, but the one thing that gave them hope was Scott's peak physical condition.
In August 2011, he filed a lawsuit against Warner Brothers, Solberg, and other production team members for negligence and failing to adhere to Thai safety laws. The case was eventually dismissed voluntarily thanks to the studio agreeing to a private settlement that involved them paying for his ongoing medical bills. But years later, reports surfaced that Warner Brothers had stopped paying McLean's ongoing medical bills, suggesting that they never really intended to honor their own word. Con Air, 1997. The desert heat in Wendover, Utah was unforgiving in August 1996. But Philip Schwartz, a 39-year-old welder from Special Effects Unlimited, was doing what he did every day on movie sets, working with dangerous equipment to make Hollywood magic happen. The cargo plane towering above him wasn't just any aircraft. It was a static model of the Fairchild C-123 Provider, the star of Con Air. Nicolas Cage is also in the movie, but come on, the plane is the real star. Schwartz had driven in from Mountain Green, Utah, 150 miles away, leaving behind his wife Colleen and 4 daughters. The special effects crew was preparing the massive aircraft for filming scenes in the Nevada desert, but something went wrong with the static model that Thursday evening, August 29th. See, the C-123 Provider was originally designed as a military transport aircraft built to withstand combat conditions in Vietnam. Even as a movie prop, stripped down and modified for filming, it still weighed thousands of pounds. While he was helping his team out to prepare the plane, it suddenly fell. Schwartz was pinned underneath, crushed by the very machine he was trying to perfect for the cameras. Police in Wendover classified it as an industrial accident immediately. Emergency responders rushed Schwartz from the small community's airport to a nearby University of Utah clinic, but the damage was already done. He was pronounced dead upon arrival. There was no real chance of surviving that level of force. The investigation that followed found no criminal intent, no negligence charges. It was just a tragic workplace accident. The production continued, but not without acknowledging what happened. When Con Air hit theaters in June 1997, the closing credits included a simple dedication in memory of Phil Schwartz. The movie went on to become a cult classic, remembered for its over-the-top action sequences and Nicolas Cage's iconic performance, not for the tragic death of a crew member. Dinosaur, 2000. The desert location near Trona, California seemed perfect for filming background shots for Disney's upcoming movie Dinosaur. It was February 25th, 1998, and the day was scheduled for capturing sweeping landscape footage in the remote San Bernardino County wilderness. The crew had set up their steel camera boom, a massive piece of equipment designed to give filmmakers those dramatic, elevated shots that make movies feel epic. Matthew Gordy and David Riggio were handling the boom setup when something went catastrophically wrong. The counterweight system that was supposed to keep the boom stable suddenly failed. Instead of staying safely grounded, the massive steel arm began rising into the air. It climbed 49 feet up, heading straight toward 115,000-volt power lines that stretched across the desert sky. At this time, there was no brake system to stop it. The crew could only watch as physics inevitably took over. When the boom struck those power lines, 115,000 volts of electricity coursed through the equipment. Gordy was electrocuted instantly, and Riggio suffered severe burns across his hands, feet, and chest, but survived. Krista Gordy filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Disney and Chapman/Leonard Studio Equipment, the boom manufacturer. The legal documents accuse Disney of negligent supervision and placing workers in dangerous conditions with defective equipment. David Riggio joined as a plaintiff seeking damages for his injuries. California's Division of Occupational Safety and Health investigated for 2 months before issuing 4 citations against Disney. The company was fined $5,000, a pretty insignificant amount for an entertainment giant. The most serious violation involved Disney's failure to maintain the required 10-foot distance between equipment and power lines. They also hadn't posted proper warning signs or provided adequate safety training for boom operators. Apparently, the deaths of 2 innocent workers is pretty affordable when you're the Mouse House. Level 4. Hell's Angels, 1930.
Here at Methodist Hospital, newsmen were aware of published reports that the body of someone called Howard Hughes was inside the pathology department. But those were just reports. It hadn't been confirmed. And as of 1:15, those reports were still not confirmed.
Howard Hughes had owned his pilot's license for exactly 5 minutes when he decided the professionals didn't know what they were talking about. Seriously. The year was 1928, and Hughes was burning through millions of dollars making Hell's Angels, his World War I aviation epic that would eventually cost more than any film in history. The experienced stunt pilots on set had just delivered news that would have stopped any reasonable director in his tracks. The aerial maneuver Hughes wanted was too dangerous to attempt. Hughes looked at these veterans, who were literally men who had survived actual combat and countless death-defying stunts, and essentially told them they were cowards. He would show them how it was done. You know, a real man. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. He was a 23-year-old heir, basically a Nepo baby, who had barely learned to fly, preparing to climb into a genuine World War I fighter aircraft that had actually killed seasoned pilots even during wartime. The stunt pilots tried reasoning with him. They explained the physics, the risks, the near certainty of catastrophic failure. He brushed them all off. He was determined to prove that he was smarter than they were. He wasn't. The crash came exactly as predicted. Hughes' aircraft plummeted toward the California Earth, and when the wreckage was finally pried apart, they found him bleeding and barely conscious. His skull had fractured on impact, and the damage to his face was so severe that surgeons would spend hours trying to rebuild what the crash had destroyed, though his left cheekbone would remain permanently damaged.
Well, the usual: personal identification, fingerprints, x-rays, dental charts.
After this autopsy, will you be definitely certain that it is Howard Hughes in there?
Oh, I should hope so, yes, sir.
But Hughes' reckless stunt was just the beginning of Hell's Angels' body count. 3 stunt pilots would die during the production. Al Wilson and mechanic Phil Jones lost their lives when their Sikorsky aircraft spun out of control during filming. Wilson bailing out while Jones, operating smoke equipment in the rear, never actually heard the evacuation order. Pilot Clement Phillips died in a separate crash while simply delivering aircraft to the Oakland location. Al Johnson flew into high-voltage power lines and burned to death. That's 4 human lives lost so Hughes could capture the perfect shot for his war movie. The film would eventually lose money on its initial release, despite the astronomical budget and the bloodshed. He only has a director credit on one other movie which contained none of the footage he shot, partly because he was more focused on the lead actress's breasts than the actual story. Silence, 2016. On the morning of January 29, 2015, a movie crew was doing pre-production work at the Chinese Culture and Movie Center in Taiwan. 3 construction workers, all in their 50s, arrived to continue reinforcing an 83-year-old brick and wood structure that had been flagged as unsafe for Martin Scorsese's upcoming film, Silence. The building needed to be stabilized before filming could begin on this epic historical drama about Jesuit priests facing persecution in 17th century Japan.
Silence is a movie that wants to get into your head, your heart, and your soul.
Chen Yulong and his 2 colleagues were dismantling parts of the Japanese-style building while simultaneously trying to strengthen what remained. Let me repeat that. They were taking apart the very thing they were supposed to make stronger. A wooden scaffolding surrounded them as they worked, apparently holding up something that was already falling apart. Around 10 a.m., the ceiling gave way with no warning, trapping all 3 workers beneath debris from the structure. The scaffolding that was supposed to support their work did no such thing, instead becoming part of the mound that crushed them. Emergency responders rushed the men to a nearby hospital, but Chen Yulong was pronounced dead on arrival. The other 2 workers suffered leg fractures and head injuries.
您们应该要将一个签证来送审一个建筑的间隙。后来发生意外的时候呢，他们是被困在里头，也说绝对不准出去。如果有媒体访问的话，都要说完全的不知道。因此，其实有临时演员在指控说，这个片场这个制作公司的态度是。
The production had specifically hired independent contractors to make the building safe because they knew it was dangerous and because it would give the filmmakers some distance from the event.
我们在前2个礼拜有请结构师来做一些鉴定，那结构师有告诉我们这个旧景呢，有一些安全的考量，那告诉我们怎么来处理，所以呢，工程部张检就请了3位工人在里面，另外5位工人在外面在做一些结构补强的工作。
Scorsese wasn't on set when it happened, learning about the death of a man working to bring his vision to life from somewhere else entirely. The film's spokesperson released a statement expressing shock and sorrow, but Chen Yulong's family was left to process a whole different and more painful kind of shock. Production was scheduled to begin just 2 days later on Friday, and despite the incident, the cameras would roll as planned. It was like the whole thing never happened. Love You, Rach Chu, 2021. On August 9, 2021, Vivek, a 35-year-old stuntman, traveled from Tamil Nadu to work stunts for the Kannada film Love You, Rach Chu. The crew had been shooting action sequences on a coconut farm near Bidadi for 5 straight days, using metal ropes, industrial cranes, and high-tension wires overhead carrying with 11,000 volts. What could possibly go wrong? Vivek was supposed to help coordinate a stunt where another performer, suspended by crane and secured with metal rigging, would fall into a small pool of water. What nobody calculated was the proximity. The suspended stuntman's metal rope came into contact with the power line above, sending the current surging through the rigging. The stuntman wearing the safety jacket survived, but Vivek, standing below, became the conductor as the electricity found its path through his body to the ground. He died instantly. 200 meters away, the lead actor, Ajay Rao, heard screaming. He deliberately stayed distant from the stunt crew due to COVID precautions, but when he reached the scene, Vivek was already gone, and another crew member lay injured, waiting to be taken to the hospital.
ರೋಪ್ ಶಾಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಲೂ ನನ್ನ ಗಮನಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ. ನನ್ನ ಸ್ಟಾಫ್ ಓಡ್ ಬಂದು ನನಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಂತ ಮಾಹಿತಿ ಏನಂದರೆ ಸರ್ ಅದು ಕೇಬಲ್ ಹಾಕಿ ಅಂದರೆ ವೈರ್ ರೋಪ್ ಶಾಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು, ಅದು ಹೈ ಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ವೈರ್ ಟಚ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, ಬ್ಲೀಡಿಂಗ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಯಿತು, ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ.
In the aftermath, director Shankar S. Raj, producer Guru Deshpande, stunt coordinator Vinod, crane operator Muniraju, and farm owner Puttaraju all found themselves in police custody. The investigation revealed what everyone had already suspected. No permits had been obtained for filming, and safety protocols were non-existent. They cut corners to save money and paid the ultimate price. The local government announced new regulations within days, while Vivek's body went to Rajarajeshwari Medical College for post-mortem. The crew scattered from the location immediately after the incident. Love You, Rach Chu would eventually complete production and release in 2022. The shadow of that August afternoon was all over it. Masti Gudi, 2016. On November 7, 2016, the filming of Kannada movie Masti Gudi turned fatal during its climax scene. 3 actors were scheduled to jump from a helicopter hovering 60 feet above Tipagondanahalli Reservoir near Bengaluru. Only one would survive. Minutes before the jump, actors Anil Kumar and Raghava Uday spoke to television crews at the location, where they admitted that neither of them had done any preparation for the stunt whatsoever. They were inexperienced swimmers, hoping everything would go well. Only the lead actor, Dunia Vijay, had fully prepared. The production moved forward despite their reservations. No rehearsals were conducted, and the filmmakers failed to provide basic safety equipment. Lead actor Duniva Vijay wore a life jacket. Anil and Uday did not, but the stunt was set to go ahead anyway. The helicopter positioned itself above the dark waters, the 3 men jumped, and that's when everything went to hell. Vijay managed to swim towards safety. Anil and Uday weren't so fortunate. They splashed desperately, struggling to stay afloat in the murky reservoir. The motorboat meant to rescue them failed to start due to technical problems, forcing crew members to watch helplessly as both men disappeared beneath the surface. Rescue teams from the National Disaster Response Force searched the reservoir, hampered by poor visibility and silt. Uday's body was recovered 2 days later, while Anil's body was found on November 10th, almost 3 days after the incident. Obviously, the whole thing was such an avoidable disaster that legal consequences followed swiftly. Police filed charges against 6 people: producer Sundar P. Gowda, director Nagashekar, stunt director Ravi Verma, assistant directors, the unit manager, and helicopter pilot Prakash Biradar. They faced accusations of causing death due to negligence, charges which were pretty justified. But despite the tragedy that claimed 2 of the leads, Masti Gudi was eventually released in 2017. The reviews were not kind, with many saying that even if they lived, the movie would have sucked. Level 5. The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1936. Warner Brothers' The Charge of the Light Brigade stars Hollywood megastar Errol Flynn in an epic recreation of the legendary 1854 Cavalry Charge. In 1936, director Michael Curtis was orchestrating the climactic battle sequence in the dusty plains of Sonora, California. The production spared no expense. The crew had excavated a 600-foot trench for cameras and rigged dozens of explosive charges across the battlefield to simulate artillery fire. But then, during one take of the charge sequence, a stuntman thundered across the field on horseback when his mount stumbled and threw him violently to the ground. In an insanely unfortunate twist of fate, the man landed directly on a broken sword that had been left scattered among the battlefield debris from previous takes. The blade had wedged itself into the rocky terrain at precisely the wrong angle, pointing straight up. The sword pierced through the stuntman's body as he crashed down from his horse at full gallop. Production assistants rushed to the scene, but there was nothing anyone could do. The impact ended his life instantly. Yet, the human death was only part of the carnage unfolding during those weeks of filming. The production employed a controversial technique called the running W. Tripwires attached to horses' legs that would send the animals tumbling at precise moments for dramatic effect. Of the 125 horses used in the charge sequence, 25 were killed outright or had to be put down afterward due to severe injuries. The animals were crashing into the rocky ground with bone-shattering force, their necks snapping as they hit the excavated trenches and rocky patches. Word spread quickly about the deaths, and nobody was happy. Even Errol Flynn, an accomplished horseman, became so enraged at director Curtis's apparent indifference to the bloodshed that he physically attacked him during production. Over 1,000 protest letters flooded Warner Brothers offices, the public outcry eventually reaching Congress, which moved swiftly to pass new laws protecting animals in motion pictures. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals banned tripwires from film sets entirely as a result of this movie, guaranteeing better treatment of animals going forward. The King of the Jungle, 1927. Gordon Standing walked onto the set of The King of the Jungle in 1927 knowing one thing would be guaranteed. He would be showcasing his acting alongside real lions. Yes, real lions. You probably don't know who Gordon Standing is today, but he was a British actor who had been working steadily in Hollywood since the early 1920s, building a respectable career in major American films. Standing had developed a close relationship with his co-star Elmo Lincoln, the barrel-chested actor who had gained fame as the first man to portray Tarzan on screen. Now, Elmo was a big guy, known for his work with dangerous animals and action sequences, but even he understood the inherent risks of working with untrained predators like these lions. And this movie required a lot of interaction between the human cast and live lions, which sounds insane today, but it was a very common practice in 1920s adventure serials. There were no special effects to create the illusion of danger, so actors had to perform alongside genuine predators with minimal protection. Which is why Gordon approached his scenes with the same professionalism he brought to every role. But during a take, a lion turned on Gordon without warning, its jaws clamping down with crushing force. The entire crew had to listen to his screams as the animal dragged him across the set, tearing through his flesh and bone while crew members scrambled to intervene. Against all the odds, Gordon survived this initial mauling, remaining conscious enough to be rushed to Los Angeles General Hospital, where doctors worked desperately to save his life. But his injuries were catastrophic. The lion's teeth had inflicted wounds that 1927 medical technology just couldn't treat. Gordon survived through the night of May 20th, but died the very next day. Elmo Lincoln was horrified by everything that had happened, convinced that the tragedy could have been prevented with proper safety measures. The death shattered Lincoln's faith in the film industry's willingness to protect its performers. It was Gordon today, but next time, it could be him, or it could be someone else entirely. Within months, the man who had defined Tarzan for a generation walked away from Hollywood entirely, choosing a salvage business in Salt Lake City over the cameras that had made him famous. The serial that cost Gordon his life was eventually completed, but the film itself would disappear. Today, only a trailer remains of The King of the Jungle, probably for the best, really. The Captive, 1915. Cecil B. DeMille had built his reputation on spectacle. By 1915, Hollywood's most ambitious director was already known for pushing boundaries, demanding that every frame of his films deliver what he called realism, the most insistent demand of the public. But this relentless pursuit of authenticity was always going to go wrong at some point. The production was The Captive, a romantic war-era drama about Sonia Martinovic and her Turkish lover Mahmoud Hassan, set against the backdrop of the Balkan Wars. DeMille was filming a scene where soldiers needed to break down a locked door using gunfire. So DeMille made a decision that would define Hollywood safety protocols for decades to come. He ordered the extras to use live ammunition. The reasoning was simple enough. Live rounds would splinter the door more convincingly than blanks. The wood would fracture and fly in ways that looked genuine on camera. The muzzle flashes would be brighter, the sound would be sharper, everything would feel more real because it was real. Which was true, actually. The first take went exactly as planned. The soldiers fired their rifles loaded with live rounds, the door absorbed the impact, wood fragmenting under the barrage. DeMille called cut, satisfied with the authentic destruction. For the second shot, where the soldiers would actually break through the damaged door, DeMille ordered them to reload with blanks. This was standard procedure to ensure there was no live ammunition still chambered. So the extras began the process of emptying their rifles and reloading with the safer blank cartridges. But one extra missed a round. When the cameras rolled again, the forgotten live bullet was still nestled in the chamber, so when the rifle discharged as scripted, the round traveled across the set at full velocity and struck an extra, Charles Chandler, directly in the head, killing him instantly. Production halted almost immediately. Their movie just became a very tragic part of history. The industry's very first documented firearms fatality had just occurred on a movie set, establishing a truly grim precedent that would haunt Hollywood for the next century and beyond. But Chandler's family received no compensation beyond a tiny studio payout. DeMille went on to make bigger movies, and no safety measures were put in place until 1933. Level 6. Ilyinsky Frontier, 2019. Ilyinsky Frontier is a World War II film about the epic defense of Moscow in 1941. On October 22, 2018, they were shooting it, some longer than others. 31-year-old Oleg Shilkin had been working on location for exactly 7 days, part of the stunt team tasked with bringing these Eastern Front battles to life. He was one of Russia's top stuntmen for now. The scene they were shooting called for a vintage German tank to advance toward Shilkin's position and halt just feet away from him, creating the illusion of mortal danger without actual risk. But tank stunts require precise timing and communication between the driver and performer. Everything depends on the vehicle stopping exactly where it's supposed to. If not, well, it's not good. That morning, cameras started rolling. The massive tank started moving as Shilkin positioned himself according to the choreography. The script called for him to throw himself under the advancing vehicle, trusting completely that the driver would brake at the predetermined mark. After all, these are professionals. But the tank kept coming. It's since been suggested that the engineer operating the vehicle may have pressed the wrong pedal, confusing acceleration for braking in the crucial moment. Instead of grinding to a halt several feet from Shilkin, the multi-ton machine continued, leaving the stuntman directly in the path of the Caterpillar tracks with nowhere to go. The crew members who witnessed the incident described Shilkin being minced beneath the tank's weight. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, the journey to the hospital a frantic race against time, but Shilkin's injuries proved too severe. He died before reaching medical care. There was nothing they could have done. The film depicted the desperate stand of Podolsk military cadets against Nazi forces advancing on the Soviet capital. These young defenders sacrificed everything to buy time for reinforcements, holding the Ilyinsky defense line against overwhelming odds. Which makes this a very tragic irony. This young stuntman sacrificed everything for a movie about young people sacrificing everything. Catch-22, 1970. British cameraman John Jordan had already proven he would take extraordinary risks for the perfect shot. He had lost his leg just 3 years earlier while filming aerial sequences for You Only Live Twice when a helicopter rotor blade sliced through it during a close formation flying scene. By 1969, he was back in the air with an artificial leg, working as second unit director on Mike Nichols' ambitious adaptation of Catch-22. The production was unlike anything Hollywood had attempted before. Paramount had assembled 18 North American B-25 Mitchell bombers at a custom airstrip near Guaymas, Mexico, creating what was effectively the world's 6th largest air force. The budget accommodated 17 flyable aircraft, with crews logging over 1,500 hours of flight time for sequences that would ultimately appear on screen for just 12 minutes. Welcome to Hollywood. Jordan positioned himself in the tail gunner section of one of the camera planes, filming the complex aerial choreography as groups of bombers took off and formed up over the Gulf of Mexico. The tall position offered the ideal vantage point to capture the dramatic footage Nichols demanded, but it also meant working in an open compartment 4,000 feet above the water.
Get ready to turn! Syria, what are you doing? What? Cut it out, you Syria! Ready to turn!
The production crew had provided safety harnesses for all personnel working in the aircraft, which is standard safety protocol for aerial filming, but Jordan refused to wear one. His colleagues on set knew about his stubborn resistance to safety equipment, but his reputation for getting spectacular footage had earned him considerable leeway. They knew better than to question a genius. So on May 16, 1969, Jordan was hanging out of the open tail turret, camera in hand, when he needed to signal to another aircraft in the formation. He extended his arm to give the hand signal, his body weight shifting as he leaned further out of the opening. Without the security of a harness and compromised by his artificial leg and a heavy gust of wind, Jordan lost his grip. He was sucked out of the aircraft, falling 4,000 feet into the Gulf of Mexico. The other planes in the formation continued their choreographed sequence as Jordan plummeted toward the water below, clueless about what had happened. His body was never recovered. The production continued filming the next day. And to his credit, the spectacular aerial sequences Jordan died capturing would become some of the most memorable footage in this dark comedy about the absurdity of war, which really is what he would have wanted. Level 7. The Viking. In March 1931, producer Varric Frizzell returned to Newfoundland with a problem. His adventure film, The Viking, which had been shot the previous year using real sealers and actual ice floes, wasn't dramatic enough for Paramount Pictures. The studio demanded more footage, more icebergs, more action. So Frizzell chartered the SS Viking, a 49-year-old wooden sealing vessel, and packed it with film crew and 25 cases of dynamite. Real dynamite, by the way. Standard equipment for breaking through ice that trapped ships. Now, let me ask you, what could possibly go wrong with a Hollywood crew surrounded by dynamite in sub-zero temperatures? By March 15th, the Viking sat locked in pack ice near Horse Islands, 8 miles from shore. The crew had been filming for days using controlled explosions to free the ship and capture dramatic footage in the process. Then everything went catastrophically wrong. An explosion tore through the ship's stern like thunder. Witnesses on nearby islands heard the blast echo for miles. The entire back section vanished instantly. Fire spread through the wooden decks, consuming fuel stores and film canisters. 27 people died in moments, vaporized by the blast or burned alive as flames engulfed what remained of the ship. Frizzell and cinematographer Alexander Penrod were among the dead, leaving survivors stranded on a burning, sinking ship in the middle of an ice field. Some jumped onto the ice and began a desperate trek across jagged, shifting floes toward Horse Islands. Others clung to debris, waiting for rescue that might never come. Those who made it to shore arrived exhausted, frostbitten, and traumatized. Captain Abram Keene Jr. had been thrown 12 feet from the bridge onto the ice during the explosion. 118 men eventually reached safety. Today, the Viking holds the grim distinction of causing more deaths than any film production in history. Hollywood had come to Newfoundland seeking authentic danger, and they found it. The Messenger, 2002.
Каждый человек задумывается там о смерти, как каждый человек задумывается о Боге. Да, я просто не уверен, нужно ли об этом говорить перед камерой. Бояться не нужно. Нужно просто помнить, и все.
On September 20th, 2002, Russian actor and director Sergei Bodrov Jr. was wrapping up his second day of filming in the Caucasus Mountains. His crew of 46 people had traveled to North Ossetia to shoot The Messenger, a contemporary story about moral choices that Bodrov Jr. had written and planned to star in. He was a 30-year-old rising star known for his roles in Brother and Vol.2, establishing himself as one of Russia's brightest directing talents. This would be the movie to send him into superstardom, if it wasn't for that Friday evening near the village of Karmatin. At 8:08 p.m., the Kolka Glacier suddenly detached from the mountainside. More than 3/4 of the entire glacier broke free and began hurtling down the valley. That chunk of ice was 1.5 miles long, containing 130 million cubic meters of material, and it was getting faster. The ice accelerated as its own meltwater created a frictionless path beneath it. Within minutes, this frozen mass of ice was traveling at 150 miles per hour down a slope that was only 6 degrees above horizontal. The detached section literally flew over another glacier bed and ricocheted into a turn. The sound must have been deafening, but there was no time to process what was happening. It was an ice avalanche. By 8:13 p.m., the avalanche reached the village of Nizhny Karmatin. The residents had exactly 5 minutes from the initial break to impact. There was nothing anyone could do. The ice and rock demolished everything in its path, burying entire communities under tons of debris. 2 villages disappeared completely. The film crew never had a chance. Bodrov Jr. and 26 other crew members were killed instantly. The avalanche continued for another minute, snapping telephone lines before finally coming to rest at 8:15 p.m. In 6.5 minutes, it had traveled 11 miles. Rescue workers searched for survivors for days, but the Emergency Situations Minister admitted there was little hope. Only 13 bodies were ever recovered from the estimated 140 people killed. The Messenger was never completed. The footage they had shot over those 2 days was buried forever under millions of tons of ice and rock. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out the first volume of this topic?